Comparative literature is an academic discipline that focuses on the study of literature and cultural expressions across different languages, nations, regions, and disciplines. It plays a role similar to international relations but focuses on languages and artistic traditions to understand cultures from within. While it often involves comparing works in different languages, it can also compare works in the same language from different cultures or nations. This field is characterized by its intercultural and transnational nature, exploring the relationship between literature and other aspects of human activity, such as history, politics, philosophy, art, and science. Unlike some other approaches to literary study, comparative literature emphasizes interdisciplinary analysis, considering social and cultural production in the context of various factors like economic dynamics, political movements, cultural trends, historical changes, religious diversity, urban environments, international interactions, public policies, and scientific developments. Students and instructors in comparative literature, often referred to as comparatists, have traditionally been skilled in multiple languages and familiar with the literary traditions, criticism, and major texts of those languages. However, newer subfields are more influenced by critical and literary theory, emphasizing theoretical understanding and the ability to analyze different art forms simultaneously rather than language proficiency. Due to its interdisciplinary nature, comparatists typically have knowledge of sociology, history, anthropology, translation studies, critical theory, cultural studies, and religious studies. Consequently, comparative literature programs in universities may involve scholars from various departments. This interdisciplinary approach has led to criticism from some who argue that comparative literature lacks clear definition and that its practitioners may become dilettantes due to the broad scope of their work. Some question whether this breadth affects the employability of PhDs in academia and the job market, although data shows that comparative literature graduates are hired at similar or higher rates than English literature graduates. The terms, comparative literature, and world literature, are often used interchangeably to describe similar courses of study and scholarship. In the United States, comparative literature is more commonly used, and many universities have departments or programs dedicated to comparative literature. Comparative literature is an interdisciplinary field where scholars study literature across national borders, time periods, languages, genres, and boundaries between literature and other arts. It also extends across disciplines such as psychology, philosophy, science, history, architecture, sociology, and politics. Comparative literature scholars aim to study literature without limitations, integrating literary experience with cultural phenomena, historical changes, philosophical concepts, and social movements. The field of comparative literature is supported by scholarly associations like the International Comparative Literature Association (ICLA) and National Comparative Literature Associations in various countries. Numerous academic journals publish research in comparative literature. For a selection of these journals, refer to Selected Comparative Literature and Comparative Humanities Journals. Additionally, a comprehensive list of books in comparative literature can be found in the Bibliography of Textbooks in Comparative Literature. Foundational works in the field of comparative literature include the scholarship of Spanish humanist Juan Andrés, Transylvanian-Hungarian Hugo Melzel de Lomnitz, who was also the founding editor of the journal Acta Comparationis Literarum Universarum in 1877, and Irish scholar H.M. Posnet's Comparative Literature, 1886. However, the roots of comparative literature can be traced back to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's concept of world literature, Weltliteratur, and the work of Russian formalists, particularly Alexander Veselovsky, who is credited with laying the groundwork for the discipline. Viktor Germansky described Veselovsky as the most remarkable representative of comparative literary study in Russian and European scholarship of the 19th century. During the late 19th century, scholars like Fyodor Buslev were primarily interested in deducing the zeitgeist or spirit of the times that they believed was reflected in the literary works of different nations. While many works from this period might be seen as chauvinistic, Eurocentric, or even racist by today's standards, the scholar's intention was generally to enhance understanding of other cultures rather than assert superiority over them. However, it's worth noting that politicians and others outside the field sometimes misused these works for such purposes. From the early 20th century until World War II, the field of comparative literature was characterized by the French school, known for its empiricist and positivist approach. Scholars like Paul van Tegem conducted detailed examinations of literary works, seeking evidence of origins and influences between works from different nations, a concept often referred to as rapport des faits. Scholars in this school would analyze how specific literary ideas or motifs traveled between nations over time. In the French school of comparative literature, the study of influences and mentalities was predominant. Today, while still practicing the nation-state approach, the French school also advocates for a European comparative literature approach. Notable publications from this school include La littérature comparée, 1967, by C. Piquois and A.M. Rousseau, La critique littéraire, 1969, by J.C. Carloni and Jean Filou, and La littérature comparée, 1989, by Yves Cheverel, translated into English as Comparative Literature Today, Methods and Perspectives, 1995. The German school of comparative literature, like its French counterpart, has its roots in the late 19th century. Following World War II, the discipline experienced significant development, largely due to the influence of one scholar, Peter Zondy (1929–1971), a Hungarian professor at the Free University Berlin. Zondy's work in Allgemeine und Vergleich and Literaturwissenschaft German for General and Comparative Literary Studies, focused on drama, lyric poetry, particularly Hermetic poetry, and hermeneutics. He invited international guest speakers to Berlin, including renowned figures like Jacques Derrida, Pierre Bourdieu, Lucien Goldman, Paul de Man, Gershom Scholem, Theodor W. Adorno, Hans Robert Haas, René Wellek, Jeffrey Hartman, Peter de Metz, and Lionel Trilling. These scholars formed a methodological canon that exemplified Zondy's conception of comparative literature. However, it's important to note that while Zondy was oriented towards the West and the new allies of West Germany, he paid little attention to comparatists in Eastern Europe. Nonetheless, his conception of a transnational and transatlantic comparative literature was influenced by East European literary theorists from the Russian and Prague schools of structuralism. These concepts continue to have significant implications for comparative literary theory today. In Germany, there are 31 departments that offer a diploma in comparative literature, although some only offer it as a minor. These departments are located at universities such as Augsburg, Bayreuth, Free University Berlin, Technical University Berlin, Bochum, Bonn, Chemnitz-Zwickau, Erfurt, Erlangen-Nuremberg, Essen, Frankfurt am Main, Frankfurt an der Oder, Gießen, Göttingen, Jena, Karlsruhe, Kassel, Konstanz, Leipzig, Mainz, München, Munster, Osnabrück, Paderborn, Potsdam, Rostock, Saarbrücken, Siegen, Stuttgart, Tübingen, and Wuppertal. However, the landscape of German comparative literature is changing rapidly due to the adaptation to the new requirements of the Bachelor and Master of Arts programs. This change is driven by the need to offer students more practical knowledge for the job market, leading to a more vocational approach to the discipline. In response to the French school, post-war scholars in the United States, collectively known as the American School, aimed to refocus the field of comparative literature on literary criticism, moving away from the detailed historical research emphasized by the French school. The American school aligned more closely with the original internationalist visions of Goethe and Posnet, seeking universal human truths through the study of literary archetypes found across different times and cultures. This shift may have been influenced by the post-war desire for international cooperation. Before the emergence of the American school, comparative literature in the Western context was primarily focused on the literatures of Western Europe and Anglo-America, especially English, German, and French literature, with occasional exploration of Italian mainly for Dante and Spanish mainly for Miguel de Cervantes literature. One significant work from this period is Erich Auerbach's Mimesis, the representation of reality in Western literature, which surveys the techniques of realism in texts from various continents and time periods. The approach of the American school is similar to modern cultural studies and is sometimes considered a precursor to the cultural studies movement of the 1970s and 1980s. Today, the field of comparative literature in the United States is highly diverse, encompassing the study of Chinese, Arabic, and other major world literatures alongside English and European literatures. There is a growing movement among comparative literature scholars, particularly in the United States, to shift the focus of the discipline away from a nation-based approach toward a more cross-cultural perspective that transcends national borders. This approach is evident in works such as Alamgir Hashmi's The Commonwealth, Comparative Literature and the World, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak's Death of a Discipline, David Damosk's What is World Literature? Stephen Todozidis-Apetnik's concept of comparative cultural studies, and Pascal Casanova's The World Republic of Letters. These scholars argue that comparative literature, originally rooted in nation-based thinking, should adapt to the increasingly globalized and intercultural world. While this shift in focus is gaining traction, especially in regions like Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Mediterranean, where the discipline is thriving, it faces challenges in the West, where comparative literature is experiencing institutional constraints. Nevertheless, scholars like Joseph Henkinson are exploring the affiliative potential of comparison, suggesting that comparative literature can move beyond the nation-state paradigm to embrace a broader, more inclusive approach. In addition to this global perspective, recent developments in comparative literature also reflect a growing interest in post-colonial literary figures and their works, such as J. M. Coetzee, Maurice Condé, Earl Lovelace, V. S. Naipaul, Michael Ondaatje, Wole Soyinka, Derek Walcott, and Lassana M. Sekou. Scholars like George Eliot Clark, Joseph Pavato, Susan Ingram, and Irene Saiwenke are contributing to the revitalization of comparative study through their research and publications, exploring new directions and methodologies in the field. Interliterary theory, a part of the study of literary comparison, examines the concept of interliterariness and interliterary communities. Initially developed in Central and Eastern European literary scholarship, particularly among Russian formalists, Czech, and Slovak structuralists, the concept has recently expanded into Latin American scholarship. This expansion has led to the exploration of alternative, decolonized, and decentralized theories and interpretations for the literatures of colonized peripheries. In Latin American criticism, the dismissal of Eurocentric comparatism has led to a different approach to the region's literatures. Critics view these literatures as part of the same literary system, suggesting that their characteristics should be examined collectively. This perspective has given rise to a Latin American version of the Derizen supranational interliterary community. The concept of interliterariness builds upon the earlier notion of literariness, coined by Roman Jakobson in 1921. According to Professor Dionys Derizen, literariness is a fundamental quality of literature that transcends individual works, leading to interliterariness. This interliterariness is seen as the fundamental quality of literature in international and inter-ethnic contexts, ultimately culminating in world literature. Derizen's theory emphasizes the existence of a supra-ethnic and supranational interliterary community with a shared culture. However, some literatures, like modern Greek and other Balkan literatures, approach literature as an expression of a linear national culture. In the late 1980s, an international project called Specific Interliterary Communities was initiated and led by Dionys Derizen of the Slovak Academy. This project aimed to further explore and understand interliterary communities and their constituent parts.